So my law practice specializes in wills, trusts, tax credits, disability benefits, ODSP applications, getting benefits increased, probate applications, Henson trust setups. And the largest part of my state practice is all the people who die who aren't my clients.
Oh, okay.
Because they die, and shortly thereafter, someone like the executor or the sister or the brother calls me and says, Ken, my sister is going to inherit money and we're afraid she'll lose her benefits. What do we do?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the bigger part of my estate work is people who call me after someone who isn't my client passes on. So, you know, pay me now or pay me later, frankly.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
you know, but I prefer to deal with my clients, you know, from when their kids are young, if we can, and then just provide assistance through the whole spectrum of their lifespan and beyond. So we have a lot of fun. We do a variety of things. And the topic tonight, the specific topic tonight is, instead of covering all the things we do, it's to talk about what additional financial supports and other supports might there be that people have not heard about, or they've heard about but didn't avail themselves of, or they applied and didn't get anything. And so that's what I'd like to touch on today. We have 132 people registered so far. So I broke it down this way. This seemed logical to me. I broke it down to the most common group that we deal with, and that is kids age 18 to 65. Now, of course, if you're 65, you're not a kid anymore, but in the eyes of your parents, you're still their child. You're always their little boy. So we still find that there are people who don't know or haven't applied for ODSP, which, as we'll see in a later slide, provides financial support on a monthly basis, either $896 or $1169. And we'll talk about that increase and how to get it, plus drug and dental coverage. If a person is applying for ODSP, and if they start, let's say, 12 months before the child turns 18, then if they are that 1/3 roughly of the population that has a cognitive disability, then they should start to become involved with Developmental Services Ontario. And this is only for people with cognitive disabilities. But if you're taken on as a client of Developmental Services Ontario, they do a couple of neat things. They give you a letter saying that you've been accepted as a person with cognitive disabilities. And what that means is that when you apply for ODSP, the child still has to satisfy the financial requirements of not having certain excess assets and certain income, which of course they don't anyway. But it means that you don't have to fill out the medical forms, because if they have deemed you to qualify for DSO as cognitively impaired, well, then you don't have to fill out the DAU medical package, which saves a little bit of trouble. You don't have to take it to the doctor. You don't have to send it to Toronto. And, you know, so if anyone here has a child who's approaching age 18, who has cognitive disabilities, you should firstly go and talk to DSO and get them to take your child on. And what this will do is it'll firstly make the process of applying for ODSP a little simpler, quicker. But they will also help you with passport funding, which we'll come to. And they will also do some really neat assessments, you know, capacity assessments, functional assessments. A report that would cost, you know, $5,000 to $6,000 if you had to pay for it yourself. So it's a really nice piece of work. The passport funding, they'll assist you with the passport application, and has nothing to do with foreign travel. It's a reimbursement program where you apply. If there's money in the bucket, you're allocated, let's just say $5,000 for different things that would essentially wind up being respite for the parents, the caregivers. So you lay out money for camps, and then you're reimbursed up to the total that you're granted. And what this helps to deal with is the post-age 21 problem, when the child has finished high school. You know, they're no longer going to high school. They're 18 or older, 21 could be potentially before they have to leave school. But then what? What do you do? So to some small extent, the passport funding helps with camps and personal support workers and trips and those kinds of things. There is a provision for questions. If anybody in the audience wants to ask questions, please do include them. There should be a box at the bottom of your screen that allows you to ask questions. And we haven't received any yet, so I suspect people haven't had the time to go and take a look at that. There's now 143 people taking part. Now, what also happens is some people, they're unable to work, they're unable to function in a competitive workplace, which is sort of the top tier of would they qualify for ODSP. The test for ODSP is can't function in a competitive workplace, or can't function in the community, or can't handle personal care, different levels of need or support. So it may be, we have assisted people from time to time, it's not common, but we have assisted people to get onto Ontario Works, which gives them $500 or $600 a month, which then has to be repaid once they're on ODSP. It's simply adjusted retroactively for any overlap period. But the primary reason we did it, rather than just going directly for ODSP, which is what we normally do, is that it also comes with drug coverage. And there are some situations where it's really, you know, the drug coverage that's a real problem. And yes, by the way, also we need financial support. There are people who by definition were working and did contribute to CPP in 4 of the last 6 years, who then become disabled, and they can apply for Canada Pension Plan disability benefits. And that's a very hard test, because technically you're not supposed to be able to work at all. Now, it is true that during the year, once you're approved, if you're approved, you could work up to the tune of, say, $5,000 a year. There's some questions. That's great. Karen, are you watching these questions? If you're approved for CPP disability, you are automatically approved for ODSP.
I've answered a couple of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you see anything that's useful that I or Melissa or Laura should touch on, if you just alert us to that, and yes, go ahead and answer some of them yourself. That's you're very knowledgeable. So
I have one lady asking me, what financial help will you get with the DSO?
You won't get financial help, but they'll help you apply for passport funding. The financial help comes from ODSP. So if you apply for CPP disability, which is a very hard row to hoe, people often have to apply 3 times or appeal. What happens is you're medically approved for ODSP, but CPP is always less than ODSP. So it's simply offset against ODSP. And there's no drug coverage, there's no dental, but there is no asset test. Now, what happens in our experience is that CPP disability is useful for people who do, for example, have a working spouse whose income would disqualify them from ODSP. But otherwise, what we do is we simply apply for ODSP. And if the person really sort of stands potentially to receive CPP disability, ODSP will oblige you to try to get the ODSP, CPP. But all it does, if you are successful, is offset ODSP. In the course of all this, both for kids over 18 and over 18 and under 18, we canvass whether they would qualify for the disability tax credit. If the child is under 18, then the tax credit saves the parent about $2,200 a year. And in cases where it has not been used, we can backfile it for 10 years and recapture $22,000 for an under 18 child. Over 18, it saves the parent about $16,000 a year, $16,000 for 10 years. And again, about $1,600 per year. And approval for the disability credit allows the child at any age to qualify for a registered disability savings plan. And we'll come to more about that in a moment. You can see I'm trying to hustle through these things. And what it means is that you can then also set up a registered disability savings plan for the child. And it's kind of convenient that the tax credit reduces the parent's taxes by $1,600, and the contribution you need to make each year is $1,500. So we'll come to that slide in a moment. The caregiver credit only comes into effect when the child is over 18. And we can backfile that as well. If the child was 28, we could backfile for 10 years, and it would recapture about $8,000. And going forward, it reduces taxes by about $1,000. Assistance for children with severe disabilities. This is for under 18, and it pays up to perhaps $450 a month. It's administered through ODSP, but for children. It's for all sorts of disabilities, and it doesn't really turn on the severity at all. What it turns on is the household income of the parents. So if you're a single parent or a single income household and you have a modest income, ACSD may well provide up to $450 a month for support for the child, respite for the parent. Just as you have passport funding, which is only applicable for people with cognitive disabilities after age 18, under 18, there are special services at home which are for any cognitive, physical, mental disability. And again, the purpose is to help to fund money for respite purposes for the parents, which usually manifests itself as camps and programs and trips for the child. One of the neat things that happens is everybody, I think, that has children under 18 is familiar with the Canada Child Benefit. Its name has changed over the years, but basically it's a benefit that the lower income main caregiver parent is given to help provide for the child by the government. Well, if you then find that you have a child who would potentially receive this benefit, and then they are approved for the disability tax credit, there is a disability child benefit in addition, which is approximately $2,400 a year if the household income is low enough. It's a graduated thing that gradually, disappears, but it doesn't disappear until the household income is $150,000. The child benefit disappears at $75,000. So what we find from time to time is that, you see, you have to have applied for the Canada Child Benefit in order to receive the disability child benefit. But if you know that you won't get the child benefit because your household income exceeds $75,000, you may well not have applied for it. And so then even when your child is approved for the disability credit, you don't receive the disability child benefit because you haven't applied for the child benefit, which you will not get. Does that make sense? So we then put these things back in place and backfile for up to 10 years, and a recapture obviously would be roughly $24,000 for a 10-year period. And we've had some really, really enjoyable files like this. If I have time, I'll tell you about that. You can see that anybody who fits these criteria is certainly a family that deserves this kind of support. And this is big for the family in this circumstance. And
Ken,
then,
I have a couple of questions if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
Somebody's written here, my son gets both CCPD and ODSP. ODSP is clawed back. Should he cancel the CPPD?
You can't just cancel it. You can't turn away that support because otherwise ODSP would cut off equivalent funding. You can't just turn it away and just get ODSP.
And how often does an individual have to reapply for the disability tax credit?
Say that again.
How often does an individual have to reapply for the DTC, the disability tax credit?
Well, most people are approved for life depending upon the type of disability. And there's no logic to it. We've had people with children with Down syndrome and autism and so on who are compelled to reapply, every 5 years, or when the child turns 18, or, silly things like this. You might perhaps try to rationalize that if the disability credit was approved based upon a mental health issue that could be solved, that perhaps you might periodically have to reapply. And I would think that that's where it's most common, you have to reapply. But clearly, there's no logic to it. It's just a matter of some bureaucrat who doesn't. We had one. I think you were dealing with the file today, Karen, where a person with a child with autism had to reapply again because, who knows? Maybe the autism disappeared, right?
Yeah, no, because flare-ups.
Yeah, exact flare-ups. Yeah, that's right. It's not continuous. It's flare-ups. You got to laugh, or otherwise you get a bit cynical, With the old age security, or over 65, demographically, we're seeing a lot of people that are approaching 65 and over, and their parents are passing on. So we have this real interesting confluence. And when the person who's on ODSP turns 65, they become a senior citizen. So they then apply for old age security and guaranteed income supplements. But the short story is that if they are receiving the full amount of ODSP, 1169 times 12, it's about 14,000. So when they turn 65, they start getting approximately 18,000, as you can see by these numbers here. Now, if they were getting CPP-Disability, then of course they would get some small CPP, because now they're 65 and over, they get a pension. And that pension is typically drastically less than CPPD, because it's only based upon the contributing years. CPPD is based upon the income while working when you can't work. So you might perhaps get $500, $600, $700, $800, $900 CPPD, and then find out that when you turn 65, you get $150 for a pension. And then what happens, of course, is that the $150 of pension, for every $1 of pension or other income, you lose 50 cents of the GIS. So you can see here that, let me just get rid of that. Hang on, I've got to get rid of this thing. I'm afraid I'll have to cancel that. It's just that I don't want these things popping up on the screen all the time. You can see here that if you lose 50 cents for every $1 of CPP, then it's basically a 50% tax. However, when you're 65, you, like all seniors, myself included, receive the Ontario Drug Benefit Program benefits. So all you pay is a dispensing fee for your medications, regardless of income. And as of summer last year, there is now a seniors dental care program. And the financial test for a single individual is about $19,000, which is just slightly greater than OAS GIS. These are the benefits that a single person receives. And you can see here that there's this amount, which is supplementary benefits, basic needs. This is the shelter amount. And this is the maximum that they receive. It is also possible to receive municipal supports. We don't find that there's very many of these that we find accessing, but they would certainly be of value if you're over 65. This is the ACSD. You can see that subject to income, it's potentially these kinds of dollars. And it provides much of the same that you get on ODSP: drugs, some respite, dental, hearing aids. And for children, you can get special services at home, mostly for respite. Here's the disability credit, child disability benefits. Are there any questions so far that you see we should answer, Karen?
Sorry, I'm just trying to open it up.
Okay.
I have a lot of DTC and RDSP questions.
Oh, yeah.
One of them is, if you receive the disability tax credit for your child and you've opened an RDSP When your child no longer qualifies for the DTC, are you able to keep the RDSP open?
No, you have to close it, but you can now keep the grants and bonds you've received. Well, that is to say, you don't have to collapse it. You can close it, and you no longer lose the grants and bonds.
Okay, and what criteria is it to qualify for the Canadian caregiver tax credit? So the caregiver tax.
Well, the child has to be over 18. They have to have a disability. They have to have income less than 21,000. And until 2017, they had to reside with you. But as of 2017, they don't. So we frequently backfile. And of course, the backfiling is affected prior to 2017 by whether the child lived with you or not. And we'll come to the ODSP statistics in a moment, so people will get a better handle on that part. You can see here that RDSPs are a good deal. Put in $1,500 a year, the government puts in $4,500. That's in the form of $3,500 grant and a $1,000 bond. And you can see here that if you do this over a 20-year period and you invest it, that would be approximately $200,000 at the end of the 20 years. If you start when the child is 18, by the time they're 38, it's potentially $200,000. When you wait the further 10 years for the grants and bonds to vest, it would then be $300,000. So the child is 48 and has an asset of $300,000. I think everybody can read that. Now these are the ODSP statistics, and you can see here that approximately 1 family in 10 has a child on ODSP. Certainly a child that has a disability. And there's 46,000 of them still living with family. So of course, those are the main ones who until 2017 would qualify for the caregiver credit. But as of 2017, the child no longer has to reside with the parent or perhaps the sibling. So what that means is that basically as of 2017, almost all of the parents of ODSP recipients would quite likely qualify for the caregiver credit. So instead of 46,000, it's about 362,000. This is big, because what it does is it reduces taxes by $1,000 a year. And if you backfile at 8 years, if you hadn't used it, that's about 8,000. And in a couple of years, it'll be 10,000 because they changed it from 600 a year to 1,000 a few years back. Pretty soon it'll be congruent with a 10-year period. So if you take 362,000 times 10,000, that's a big number every year. This is the benefit increase, the ODSP increase. We regularly, we're pushing 1,000 times we've done this now. Karen was especially active with this year. This was a big year for these increases. And you can see that if you make arrangements correctly, a child at home, and that's these 46,000, would receive 1169, which is 273 more than 896, which is the room and board amount. These are other programs. Ontario Works, which we've talked about briefly. Last time I looked, it paid about $500 or $600 a month, but it's based solely on the fact that you're unemployed and have no assets and no other income. There's the CPP-Disability, passport funding. Something that happens regularly with us is we are contacted by personal injury lawyers. People do get into motor vehicle accidents. Sometimes they are people who are on ODSP who are then hit by a car or drive a car. Other times they are people who are in a car and as a result become people who are on ODSP. And what happens is years go by, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years go by. And finally, there's going to be a settlement. And then all of a sudden, when they come close to this settlement, usually it's the person on ODSP who twigs to the fact that they're going to have an asset. Won't that disqualify me? And then all of a sudden they have to rethink the settlement because now they presume they won't have ODSP or drug coverage or, you know, all of those things. How will it affect my guaranteed income housing? All of these things. And then of course the personal injury lawyers get a little exasperated because they've done their best for all these years and they've footed the bills, but now we're coming to the end of the game, and the client won't sign the release because they're uncertain about what's going to happen to their ODSP. So that's where we get the call. And as of August 1st, 2017, all tort settlements are exempt. So the amount that you get for pain and suffering in full is exempt. Used to be 100,000, but the income generated from it is not exempt. So you have to deal with that. And if you get statutory accident benefits, which can be also hundreds of thousands of dollars for lost income, medical care, housekeeping services, transportation, therapy, those are not automatically exempt, but they can be exempted. And this is an interesting aspect here. What about all the people who accepted a settlement prior to 2017 and lost their ODSP? Because at that time it was only 100,000 exemption. Well, these people could certainly be restored to benefits. If you have a child who is paying a hydro bill, and I suppose you could even make arrangements at home to have them responsible for certain utilities. If their name is on the hydro bill, well then they, based on their income, which is very modest, they could qualify for the electricity support program, which gives them a reduction in their bill of $45 a month. And that brings me to my last slide. Are there any particularly on-point questions? If not, I'll set up the slides for Laura and Melissa.
No, you can go ahead and set up. I'll have this actually as one. If a 55-year-old man on ODSP is having severe financial problems now, is it wise or advisable for him to cash in part of his RDSP?
Say that again.
A 55-year-old man on ODSP is having some severe financial problems.
Yeah.
Is it wise or advisable? Nope, not sure what happened here, but
I'll have to have you come in and share this screen for me, Karen. Is it wise or advisable to use the RDSP to do what?
like to cash part of his RDSP.
Well, you can certainly do it, but if you haven't had it for 30 years, and if the grants and bonds are not vested, if you take out 1,500, you lose 4,500.
Right.
That's a bit of an aversion. And if it is all locked in and it started to pay out, well, there's a payout formula that gives you the money that is in there paid over a 23-year period. So it's, you know, it's just not that available to do other things like pay off debts, buy houses, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Karen, could you come and share that other screen for me?
Are we going to go to her screen? Which one is it? This is hers here. Oh, is it yours? This one, hers here.
Can you see that, Laura?
No,
Okay,
we just see you still.
okay.
Okay. Should be this one here. The screen. What about now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so you tell me when to move forward right now, who we are and what we do.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us be a part of this. We really appreciate it. Just quickly, who we are and what we do. So Laura and I are from the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. Laura's our transitional support coordinator. So she helps people who are on Ontario Works get onto the ODSP program. And most of this presentation is going to focus on the tips that Laura has to complete a successful ODSP application. So you can flip next slide. Yep. Okay, so BIS. So we are, for folks who don't know, the Brain Injury Society of Toronto is a nonprofit organization. We are one of many brain injury associations across the province. So if you are living in Toronto, you are free to contact us if you have any questions about our programs. But if you are somewhere else in the province, the Ontario Brain Injury Association, OBIA, they have a website and a phone number you can call to find out if what the closest brain injury association is that you can connect with. And when we talk about Laura's program, what I will say is her program has been running in some of the other areas in the province, and some other ones have applied for funding to get a similar program going. So hopefully there's a Laura in your area as well. So we provide free programs and services to people living with brain injuries, families and their caregivers. We're a charitable nonprofit. Most of our funding does come from our fundraising events, although we do have some government funded programming, which we'll talk about. And basically our mission is to enhance the quality of life of people living in Toronto with brain injury through advocacy, awareness, education, and support. So you can go to the next slide. Great. So just quickly, so the reason we're able to have a Laura is that we got 3-year program funding from an Ontario Trillium grant. And this allows us to have Laura support people with brain injury or cognitive challenges apply for the ODSP program. And we'll talk a little bit about why we feel that's important to have somebody assist someone through the ODSP application process, because it can be quite confusing. In addition to that, Laura also calls in, it's like a wraparound hug. Laura also provides other supports, helping to refer people to mental health professionals, find them a family physician, get legal aid support if that's something they require. So it's not just one task she's doing, she's really involved in all areas of their lives. Rich. Okay, so basically our program hallmarks, we try to be barrier-free. A lot of programs, when people are trying to access them, there are requirements. They need certain documentation, like ODSP, but also other support programs. So really, we don't require people to have documentation. Some of the people we support might be transient and they don't have documentation, so others might have lost it along the way or have never gotten a formal diagnosis. So we help to kind of gather that information so that they can then move on to ministry funded programs. We don't have any punitive measures in place. We certainly just meet people where they're at. We have an open door policy. We don't place any judgment on our participants. They're supported regardless of their state. So basically, as Arthur Ashe says, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Go to the next slide. Okay, so why do we feel that people often need support filling out the ODSP applications? They are large, they are confusing, and Laura is going to spend some time breaking down the pieces that are involved in the ODS application. But basically, we know that people who might have a cognitive impairment or a brain injury, they face barriers. So they might have memory impairments, so they don't necessarily remember to pick up the package, bring it to their doctor's appointment, attend the appointment, schedule the appointments. Sometimes there's a lack of insight into medical diagnosis and daily challenges. They might not understand the process. And then the organizational skills, again, gathering those needed documents, compiling them. And then advocacy skills is a big one. So Laura helps to advocate for them and you know, go over with them what their challenges are and help them kind of communicate that to their medical professionals. I'm talking a little fast because Laura has a lot more things to say than I do. And so does this program work? Yes, the answer is yes. So Laura has supported, I think 32 applications have been submitted with Laura's help. 100% have come back approved for ODSP, which really demonstrates that if somebody has someone helping them through the process, the chance of success is much greater. We know about half the people who apply for ODSP benefits get refused. And so again, if you have someone supporting you, your chances are much higher. So this is just basically again, proof is in the pudding, just showing that what Laura does works. So we've had 75 referrals to our program. The 33 ODSP applications that she helped create were in and were approved. And then again, she helps with kind of those wraparound supports. So 29 folks also had support with referrals to other agency applications. I've included housing, the ABI network, Cheers, West Park, Ontario Shores, and so forth.
That's good work. Good work.
Thanks, Laura. So we can actually skip, I think, the next 4 slides. So 8, 9, 10, and 11. And really, this is Laura's program, so I'm going to pass it on to her, and she's going to talk about all the wonderful things she does.
Sure. So what I do is support people in gathering the information, looking at how they functionally cope in the community, and getting all the examples and everything down together on paper for whatever physician or nurse practitioner is going to be signing off on the package. And we start there with, there's several steps, but the very first portion is to initiate the package, and that's by contacting the ministry. So you can do this several ways to initiate the package. The Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services is the one that supplies the application to you with the reference number. So you can go on the ministry website. You do have to call your local organization, and that's available if you need to contact 211 to get that information, or just look on the website with your postal code, because it is different. Some people are familiar with one location because, you know, a family member, a friend, someone has talked about it, but it might not actually coordinate with where they live. So that's something to be aware of. So you can contact the ministry, the local Ontario Works office, or the Ontario Disability Support Program office directly in order to get things going. So that's step 1. The next slide there looks at step 2. And this is what Kenneth talked about before, is the financial eligibility portion. You have to look and see if you're financially eligible to even start the process. A lot of people in the community, we worked in the private sector with a lot of MVA before, and you have a lot of the therapists working with the person wondering whether they qualify or not. And so the advice I always give is, you know, don't be the barrier. Call and ask, and allow them to determine whether they're financially eligible. And then obviously if there's issues with that, then you are contacting a lawyer for the support, like Kenneth. The first, when we look at this second step here, it does include the introductory screening call. So the website for the ministry indicates that you can put in your financial information online to determine. I always push people to make a personal call to the office. I find sometimes there's not enough information regarding their finances that is given, and there's a lot of little bits and pieces that they take into account, like if you have a tort or things like that, that aren't that can be not considered part of the asset test. So it's nice to call, speak to someone, and they'll set up a time for you to meet. Sometimes we say just call the ODSP office. A lot of the times the workers will direct you back to Ontario Works, only because they want to ensure that you are financially stable, and ensure that if you require something immediately, that you have access to it. And a lot of times when you talk to OW, some people will find that they don't need Ontario Works, and then we have to be very vocal and state, well, we were wanting the ODSP package in the first place. Can we look at the financial eligibility check for that? So sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth before we get to someone who's going to actually release the package to us. But we assist with individuals that may not have family members or friends, that circle of care that provides that for them. We walk them through those steps ourselves.
We have some feedback on the question box. So, what are there? Can you close the slides on the left side? We cannot see the words on the actual.
Oh.
How is the display for YouTube?
We see the main, we see the slides at the side, and then the main slide we're talking about up front.
I'll come in and try to fix it.
Can you see the whole thing?
I can see the whole big slide
Okay.
on my end. But if you have to change it, we have the slides open on another computer as well. Just,
Misty says that.
so if you go to slideshow, yeah.
On the actual slides.
Yeah, there's slideshow option. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Is that better?
Okay, so then you just gotta switch them normally.
Where is it?
Right there. Yeah.
Yep, so we'll just walk down a bit.
Misty, is that better? Is this the next one, do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
We are. So when we were talking about step 2 is the office there, worker at the ODSP will, or Ontario Works will determine if you're financially eligible, and they will release a package to you at that time. So the next step then is to look at completing the package itself. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. If you have a physician that's been seeing you for a while and has the knowledge of the disabilities and documentation, it's usually pretty smooth. If you're trying to seek a doctor or have been a recipient of walk-in clinics and don't have someone that really knows your medical history, this part's a little bit difficult. And this is where we help in gathering as much information for the physician. We actually create a draft copy of the document to try to come up with as many examples as we can. So the steps in the application are activities of daily living, and then there's another section that's completed by the applicant, the self-report form. Interestingly enough, on the application it says that it's not necessary to complete the self-report form. However, I find it very informative if the applicant does complete that, because it gives a lot of history and a lot of meaning to the day in and day out functioning of the client. So we can move to the next slide. I've included it here right out of the Act, mainly so that people can see it. It does not indicate in the definition of a person with a disability for the ODSP application. It doesn't indicate which impairment allows you to access ODSP. And that's important to note because it's not one thing specifically. Some people have had multiple different conditions, and cumulatively together the effect of them on their function is what allows them to receive ODSP or be granted ODSP. So I wanted to put it up there. It is also a different definition than some of the other disability applications like CPP-Disability. So because one's federal and one's provincial, they operate differently, right? However, it's good to know, and Kenneth has talked about this a little bit, is that if you are approved for the Canada Pension Plan Disability, you don't actually have to complete the medical forms for ODSP. You can call the office directly, indicate that you have CPP disability, and then they will determine whether you're financially eligible. So it helps people out to skip this whole application process if they had the CPP disability. Just something to note. So on the next slide there, a lot of people ask, oh, can I search for the application online? so I can start filling it out and know it is something that is generated by the ministry, by the worker. It is given a specific reference number to the applicant. And so it's not something that you can download off the internet unless someone's uploaded a blank document to view. But you wouldn't be able to submit it without that generated reference number that's associated with your name, age, date of birth, address, and your either Ontario Works number or ODSP 9-digit member ID. So they do that to monitor the applications that come in. Okay, so the next slide, and we'll go over some just tips and tricks, but part of it is finding a physician that will help you complete the application. It doesn't, the general practitioner, the family physician is one, but for the main package, there are other people that are allowed to, so psychologists, psychological associates, ophthalmologists, optometrists, and registered nurses that are allowed to practice in Ontario. And then there's another section, the activities of daily living, that opens it up to other people, other practitioners. So that's where we see the speech language pathologists and social workers. So there are two components. It's nice sometimes when one person can complete the whole package together. Things are a little bit more smooth, but if you have access to, say, an ophthalmologist that knows your eye condition, or a social worker that's been working with you for several years, they might have some great insight into function. So we want to find that practitioner. And a good place to look for people who might not have a lot of access to care otherwise because of financial issues. A good place to start is looking in at community health centers in your area. They're LHINs funded. They also have access to a lot of free support. So sometimes they have social workers or psychotherapists where you're getting that service an hour every couple of weeks, and it's included in being a part of that community health center. Sometimes they have dental. Sometimes they have diabetes support. Sometimes they have for other person's lactation support. Sometimes they have orthotic supports as well. So that's one place to look into in your area. You can search it and see if at least try to get on the wait list if you don't have a physician that you've been working with already. So that's just a little tip because it comes with extra resources that are free. So the next part after finding someone that's qualified to sign off on this is to look at the actual preparation of the health status report. A lot of times people will walk into their doctor and say, here, I need this signed and filled out. And it is a large package. So there's not a lot of time in the appointment to do it. Physicians will take it away and fill it out. But if we can provide information to them regarding conditions, it opens up a few conversations. I often find clients will go to a doctor maybe about, neck pain or ankle pain, or maybe they broke a bone, but they might not talk about some of the other issues that cause concerns with their function. So they might not talk about head injuries they've had, concussions. They might not talk about some of their mental health issues. So it's nice if we look at these aspects and start writing them down. So the condition part is in the form, and there's the definition there. This is a list. It does not mean that you will be approved for ODSP if you have this. It's all about what is contained in the form to document how it affects your function. But I've listed some things that people have placed in their application with supporting documents and evidence. Okay, so we look at, this is, yep, that's perfect. So this is that first part. I've asked one of the applicants if I can use their page to show, and I've blanked out their name. And of course, at the top there, you'll see that it is given a referral number, so you need that. And this is where it talks about the condition and the impairment. We like to ask people to break down their conditions and think about themselves as a physical person, what their cognitive, psychological needs are, or their emotional or mood related health. And really look at if we can kind of connect all those different parts of their body and see if there's information that needs to be added to the document, right? Some of it, sometimes, of course, we work with brain injury, so a lot of the times there's a lack of insight into what their functioning health needs are. So we sometimes ask family members, spouses, people in their community that have contact with them, of course, with their permission. That's an open conversation of people in their circle of care, just to get information, just to get those good examples of how they're functioning. And we write down as many of the conditions that come up. So if they have a mood disorder or if they're suffering from anxiety and depression. And we always look at it as not lumping all of the, say, mental health issues in one pile. We like to tease them out separately, because you can be someone that suffers from anxiety and depression, but not necessarily another mood-related disorder. And you can be someone that suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, but not necessarily some other one. So, and there are definitely people that have several conditions. So we tease them out and give them their own little category and condition. So if we go on to the next slide, I've just laid out some examples, and I won't talk about all of them, but this is sort of the wording that we look at when we're writing out the restrictions. Of course, this is a lot for a physician to fill out when they're trying to get through the whole document, the whole application. But if we provide some examples with some wording based on tasks that they do around their house, then we're giving information to the physician to contemplate and potentially include. So we look at fatigue, we look at their physical, are they able to get up out of bed? Are they able to bend and access all their cupboards? Is it hard to do their grocery shopping? Can they remember when their doctor's appointments are? Are they good for the first couple hours in the day, but as the day wears on, they have increased headaches, pain, and increased fatigue? Do they have safety risks? Are they forgetful and leave the stove on? Can they remember sequence of instructions? When they're outside, do they stay inside because they can't handle crowds? Or do they have sensory overload? So these are all the things that we look at, and we write them out for each condition. So if we go on to the next page, I've included this as well, because these are the big, the pages, yeah, the meat and potatoes that the disability adjudication unit is looking at. One thing that happens a lot with applications, and we've heard about it at the Social Benefits Tribunal or in some of the documents that come back with denials for individuals, is that the restrictions on this other page here don't meet up with the conditions on that first page. They number them on the conditions page, but they don't automatically do it on this one, this page 4 of the application. And if the doctor hasn't filled them out previously, or the registered nurse, this is where there can be denials if one category doesn't line up with the restriction, duration, and prognosis of the second page. So I just want to point that out so people can pre-line it up for the person signing off on the document. I wasn't that great with the numbers. It was a little big, but you get the point there. The next portion in the document is intellectual and emotional wellness scale. So the biggest thing here is fill it out. So many people leave bits and pieces blank, but it's really, really important that each section, if it pertains to the individual, is filled out. And it says that it's not, it even says on the document that it's not necessary if the person has physical issues and nothing else, but I still say fill it out because there's lots of things that pop up with functioning while you talk about it and discuss it with the applicant or the circle of care. Okay, again, the tips are always think of the individual as physical, cognitive, and emotional person, that they have all these components to them. They're not just a physical human being. And look at it, and they indicate classes. And this is how they decide whether someone is eligible. They look at whether they are someone in class 1 with no symptoms or signs, or someone that has a varying degree of issues. And it's whether it relates to safety, it relates to pain issues, it relates to ability for someone to get through a task. So time spent doing it. So if there's any degree of change because of the condition or disability, or any impairment to function, then it would move someone out of class 1 into these other classes that that determine eligibility. So I tend to ask people a lot of questions. I spend several hours with them actually getting all the examples, and this is really helpful for the physician. Physicians sometimes spend 15 to 20 minutes with one of their patients every couple months, but might not get to these types of questions. So I'm just taking sleep as an example, and I've listed here, and I won't go over all of them, but I've listed several questions that I would ask someone just to talk about sleep, because it's a huge it's a huge part of our health, whether we have good quality sleep. But someone, when you ask them questions, how's your sleep? They're like, oh, fine. And fine doesn't give very clear direction to a physician on what could be an issue. And we've discovered that lots of people have sleep apnea, which is harmful to their health if gone unchecked, by just asking some simple questions. So clarifying questions of their conditions and of each category of the intellectual and emotional wellness scale is really important. So I just wanted to give that as a tip. Okay. The next part that we help out with is helping them gather information. So part of the document, you allow for supplementary information from medical visits, so clinician notes and that. So if they need to gather this, if their physician doesn't have copies of this, this is a good time to have that conversation with helping them obtain the documents. And sometimes the doctor's office are just going to get them to sign off to allow the records to be transferred to them, which is great. Other times we're helping them gather, okay, did you see this, when you were younger, were you seeing any specialist, and then we'd help them search for the name. Another one is getting a list of medications, past, present. If they go to a pharmacy, it's easy to support them in making the call and gathering that information so it's ready to go. The other portion of the document is the activities of daily living index, and this is where it really highlights how the conditions affect the person. A lot of times we'll be discussing things that we've talked about in the health section as far as what we've written down as restrictions, and this is where we tease it out. And I always get people to think about, these particular examples and really talk about in a conversation how it affects them. Taking transit, like, do they know where to get on and off? Do they get lost? Do they forget their route? Are they overstimulated in the crowds? Or do they get agitated or irritated? Or are they fine? If taking transit's great for them, perfect. Is there physical disability? If they had to get off somewhere, would they know how to access help if the route was interrupted for whatever reason? So we use these as examples. Step 3, this is the last section of the report. And this really looks at the feeling portion. How does the client or the applicant themselves feel about their physical, cognitive, and emotional? And a lot of times there's, in the application, the ODSP application itself, it gives several examples of what people have written about, and they're actually pretty decent. They touch upon having the applicant speak in the first person and putting down, this is how I feel, or sometimes some days are great and other days it's really difficult. And I often help them. I say, okay, I'm gonna write down and jot down the information as you say it, and we'll gather it in, and we include it. It's really important when the adjudication unit is working through these documents to approve that they see firsthand how the client is functioning. So we help them with that. So just the takeaway points, and I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this was useful for people with the ODSP application. Some things to do is make a draft copy, which is looking at all the different examples of function. Everything you do in your day, whether it's getting up, showering, eating, going out of the house, and look at all those types of examples, because that's really going to inform the physician of how you function. If you can't write it down, ask someone to, and if that's hard, maybe just record some notes on a device like a phone. If you go to support groups or community centers and you work with people, maybe ask them for support letters, because it can be submitted with the other documents and clinician notes. And then that'll back up, give sort of like a time frame of how long you've accessed supports or what maybe some of the functional implications are. So that's something that we that we look at. And a quotation that we enjoy a lot from Mr. Trevor Noah here is we say that people love to say, and I can't see it totally, but I'll read it from my computer here, is people love to say, give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, teach a person to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. And what they don't say is, and wouldn't it be nice if you gave them the fishing rod? So we want to give as many tools as we can to people in order to get the application completed in a way that'll allow it to be approved and not go through a denial process.
Be the fishing rod.
So be the fishing rod.
All right. Well, I think we're coming close to wrapping up. I'm just going to check a few questions here. There's one from Helena. Do you provide this free of cost to clients to apply for ODSP?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And there's one here, this one comes close to my own heart, from Bruno. Why does someone who is more reliant on a caregiver get less money than a more capable person? That's a very good question, Bruno, because of course it's only the family, the parents of a child who is less capable and also happens to be living at home with them and providing 24/7 care that gets the $896, not the $1169. You know, if that same person was in 24/7 supported living, they would get the organizational support amount of $1169. And if the child feeds themselves either through a G-tube, gastro-tube, or by choice, I had one file like this, by choice only drank protein drinks, well then they're feeding themselves. well, they get the higher amount. It's only if the parents make the food and serve their child. So I don't really know, Bruno. Let's see what else we got here. Is the asset maximum to qualify for ODSP 10,000? No, it's not. It's 40,000. And we have ways of exempting a further 100,000. So his question is, and if so, what if during the injury time you had to use your savings to get by before being under 10,000? Can you get the money for the time before the asset changed? Well, no. That's wishful thinking, Joel. And but we regularly assist people applying for ODSP, very commonly who have assets. And we have various ways of dealing with the substantial assets so that they can still get ODSP. And similarly, people on ODSP who then inherit sizable sums. Well, of course, you have to find some way to exempt the inheritance or the lottery win in order to not lose ODSP. So it's, you know, the financial side of it as compared to the medical side of it is a whole other issue. And of course, most people who are applying for CPP-Disability, by definition, they're young workers. So by definition, one hopes that they have some savings, perhaps an RDSP of some amount. And if that asset on the face of it exceeds the new rule of $40,000, well, then of course they would be turned away. They wouldn't be told what to do by ODSP. They would simply be turned away and have to live on the money. That's my little rant for the day. Do you guys have any final comments or questions? No?
I just have one question for the ladies from one of the people on here. Can people born with a cognitive disability access your services, or do you deal with acquired brain injuries?
That's a really good question. We do get it a lot. So again, a lot of, acquired brain injury is defined as an injury that happens after childbirth. That being said, we don't tend to turn people away. So if somebody comes and acknowledges they have a cognitive impairment or a brain injury, again, we're not asking for documentation. We don't ask anybody to prove their brain injury. If they feel they fit in our programs, they're welcome to come. I should say what we don't provide is support people to assist them in our programs. We certainly just don't have the funding for that. So if somebody needed a support person to come with them, we would invite that person to come along. But again, we will never ask you to prove your brain injury or how you got it or how you acquired it. So BIST kind of has an open door policy that way.
That makes sense. Okay, well, I think this was an excellent presentation. I appreciate your involvement and all the information. We're gonna, I think, close the doors now. It's just about 8:15. We try to keep these things, you know, timely, not too long. We're down to 99 attendees. And one of the questions that was asked was, can we get copies of this? And the answer is yes. So everybody who registered, including everybody who, of course, took part, will get a message with a link to the video and also the PowerPoint slides. So everybody who registered, 420 who registered, will get a copy of the video and the slides. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for taking part and wish everyone a good night.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care, guys.